Hi, it's Alex Cosper with another SacTV.com Riverside Chat here at the American River. And I'm just reflecting on the summer of 2025. You know, it hasn't been that great for a lot of people, but for me, I got a lot accomplished, especially with my site, SacTV.com. Creating those local artist pages, almost like a social network or a community, online community, except that I'm the one who created all the profiles of all these local bands. And there's a lot of research, a lot of copying and pasting, like links and stuff like that. But as far as learning about it, yeah, I learned a lot. One thing I learned that it might not just be true of Sacramento indie artists, but indie artists everywhere. A certain percentage of them are trying to copy what's going on in the national scene. And I don't like that because I'm never that big into what the trends are, really. I just have an ear for certain types of music that I like that usually I think meet a high standard as far as originality and a conceptual idea. Like, is the song about anything? If not, why isn't it just an instrumental, which would be beautiful? I love instrumentals. I've written some instrumentals, and I really only like adding words to music if it means something. And I learned that from the Beatles. All You Need Is Love is obviously a love anthem, meaning like world peace, that kind of love. Whereas some of the songs on Sgt. Pepper, I think a lot of critics saw more into it than what was there, but that's still cool because that makes the music more interesting when you can see your own layers of depth within something that might already be kind of deep. So I just noticed that there's either that the people trying to be mainstream, copying what's already popular, or there's seems like a bigger percentage trying to do anything but that, like because they can't stand it, I guess, the commercial sounds of the 2020s. A lot of it is just about branding and commercialism and fitting into formulas, and that's boring to people who really care about music and want music to have a certain magical power in society, like it did in the 60s and 70s and to some degree the 80s and 90s. In my experience, I was a kid in the 60s and 70s. I wasn't that conscious in the 60s, but by the 70s, mid-70s, I was listening to top 40 radio, and by the end of the 70s, FM, like rock radio. And then in the 80s, I started working in top 40 radio, and in the 90s, alternative radio. So to me, that was the alternative, or that was the radio at its peak, its heyday. To me, was the 90s. To others, it was 70s or 80s, but nobody's saying 2000s, 2010s, or 2020s, because radio has been just through hard times, just by, it's suffered lots of layoffs and cost cutting, because it just hasn't made as much money as they projected back in the day when I was working. I was program director at Quad, and I helped the station move out of unprofitability to profitability, just with great ratings, from taking it from the gutter to top 5. You know, to me, that was the heyday of radio, like mid-90s. And then the internet came right after that. Like, I mean, it was already happening. It was ramping up since the early 90s. And the most nerdiest computer people were already on it in the early 90s. But jokers like me, who resisted the computer revolution for a while at least, even though I was working on a computer at Quad, but I thought it was sickening that I was, I didn't want things to be controlled by computers. I wanted humans to control playlists. I didn't want the computer to control it. And I never let it did. I always used the computer editing system to flip songs around and create my own mix of music. So that's what I was really into back then, and it worked. People loved it because it was a unique mix of music. It wasn't trying to be like any other station. You know, I wasn't trying to make it a punk rock station or an Americana station or all those other sub-trends. It wasn't a grunge station. It wasn't a electronic dance station. Although in the 2000s, I worked at an electronic dance station in San Francisco called Energy 92.7, and that was a fun experience. I didn't get to control the music though, other than sometimes you get to flip songs around at that station no longer exists, but at the time it was very popular in San Francisco. So that was kind of my radio experience. And then, you know, I still would point to the 90s as the heyday because, you know, President Clinton signed the Telecom Act of 1996, and that's what changed radio into this really boring nationalized corporate thing that, I mean, it just completely destroyed the whole local culture aspect of radio and the idea that people in the audience could be a part of the airwaves. I mean, that just seemed like that seems like a long time ago now. The internet, of course, took over, and boom, boom, boom. It's been the key thing that occupies a lot of people's time these days. So, that being the case, I wanted to expand the site SAC TV to cover a lot about the local music scene, because I'm part of it, and I've been part of it since the 80s, actually. It's funny, I did have a record on the air in 1989 on my where I was music director at Quad. But people were requesting it, so we kept playing it. And other than that, I had a local show at Quad, you know, where we played all local music for about an hour on Sunday night. And every now and then I'd let them slip in my songs for that, because, you know, I just to show that the station cared and I cared about songwriting and just recording music. So what I found in my study of researching all this local music is that a lot of people, they're either too generic sounding, like they're just fitting in with generic, boring stuff, or they're too out there sounding, like too wacko, too non-mainstream, too uncommercial, too unmarketable. So there's a balance in there in between those, and that comes down to artistic songwriting. And I always turn to the Beatles to point to them as examples of a band that knew how to do that, to mix the artistic vision with marketability, you know. So in other words, music that would work with a crowd because maybe there's something already familiar about it that taps into traditional values, or maybe it's innovative and that's what people like about it because it's doing something different. But they knew how to keep it within the realm of listenability. You know, in other words, everything they recorded and put out, it was easy to listen to. And not to say it's easy listening music, meaning soft rock or whatever, but no, everything they put out, anyone could listen to and either appreciate or criticize in an analytical way. But the truth is, they were just beyond the norm. They just wrote so many good songs, and you know, were great performers. And George Martin, the producer, just knew how to make them sound like, you know, top-notch musicians. So anyway, that's kind of my assessment of the local scene so far, is that you got a lot of followers of just mainstream bands, and you also have a lot of people trying to do their own thing, but it's so far out there that it can't really make it to the mainstream. Now, there are exceptions, and I think that it's important to point out, just because someone's not on the national charts, that doesn't mean their music's bad or they're failing. It means that they're just not reaching a lot of people. And the way you reach a lot of people is through promotions, which usually cost money of some sort, usually either with a partner or through some platform that advertises a brand, puts it in front of lots of eyeballs. I mean, and ears. That's how it works. I mean, radio, what you hear on the radio, it's because labels that provide the music, and there's like 3 big labels. Then you have hundreds of independent labels, but they don't compete well with the 3 big labels. But the big labels, they have promotion people who are paid to get songs played at radio, and they get bonuses the more airplay that they can get for their artists. So there's an unfair advantage in a way to big label music. On the other hand, that's capitalism. It's all about big stacks of cash, and the biggest stacks of cash are the ones that are going to control the market. That's just how it works. So I would want indie artists to consider come up with creative titles, because titles kind of are the first form of advertisement and the first messages you're sending out to fans or potential fans. So I mean, make titles creative. Don't call a song "It Is Love" or "It's Love" or you're my baby. Don't use all the old junk that's been done to death, like the simplified, stupefied top 40 garbage. You know, use creative titles, and that alone will start to make people curious if your music is creative. So that's what I do with Sunsetrip. I come up with all these creative titles. And my latest album, Time Tunnels, it's almost done. I know it's kind of late, getting late in the year, and I had hoped to have put it out earlier in the year, but the entire album soon will be available, and it features this next song. This is TVs and Transistors.
TVs and transistors everywhere. TVs and transistors everywhere. 1950s TV and radio everywhere. Call your local DJ, request a song on the air. Never mind the noise of the Hollywood stage drive through. What number are you? Local diner jukebox, see the way youth rocks. Space age folks on nations, working on race relations through a topical talking box. Mainframes form computer networks. Soon it wouldn't be the same game with integrated circuits. Big tech can be small. Messages can travel through a wall. That's what we learned from TVs and transistors.